Welcome. We're excited to have you here. My name is Ann Ayers. I have the honor of being the Dean of the Colorado Women's College, and we are having Friday discussions about equity every other Friday. So this is our Friday feature. Today, I am so excited to have Pam Jeffords joining us. She is a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers in their diversity, equity, and inclusion practice, which is terrific. And Pam and I met, gosh, close to 20 years ago. We were just saying this might be just like joining us for one of our after hours conversations that we used to have, because we've been having these conversations for 20 years, really is what it boils down to. You know, Pam's also on the board of the advisory board here at the Women's College, which has been terrific. And we're focused on and really committed to a belief that equity is within reach, that we're not a patient bunch, right, Pam? We're thinking that we're going to make some progress here pretty quick. And so every day we provide perspective shifting educational experiences. We consider this and hope this will be one of those for you, because we really do want a world where everybody can just be their truest and best selves. We think that that's going to be a pretty great place to be. So when I was talking with Pam earlier this week and asking her, Pam, what should I say in the intro about you? She had the most fascinating response, which was, I think you need to tell people that I have 4 kids and that I have a partner who also works. And I think maybe you ought to mention that I'm from Louisiana and from a relatively traditional family. Now, when I ask people for these questions like that, Pam, that's usually not their answer. So I said to you, I said, well, what about, you know, the credentials and the education? And you said what you always say, which is it's really important that people understand who I am from the inside and have that perspective. And as we share our perspectives today, I think that's important. So I really appreciated that you shared those things. I will also share that Pam is very dedicated to LSU. It's a darn good thing that DU and CWC don't have a football team, or we would be not on the list, right? And Pam spent a lot of her career in business development and sales in the telco world. And so Pam and I met while we were at Quest. That's where we met 20 years ago. And we had offices right next to each other downtown here in Denver. And you really were a top performer in sales and business development across multiple companies in that industry. And then moved into consulting in a really neat way, I think, to sort of say, like, one of the things that had always been part of your practice had been this diversity, equity, inclusion. And so you went to Mercer, where you developed their entire diversity, equity, inclusion practice, turned that into a multi-million-dollar practice area, and now you're at PwC doing the same thing. So I'm going to add your credentials, even if you're not. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm really happy to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. And we need somebody to keep pinging us to remind us that we're not just having our Friday coffee chats, because we'll start going off into a different direction. But thanks for trusting me that I will stay on topic on a Friday afternoon.
I know, you and me both. Before you know it, I'll be asking for more parenting advice or things like that. So you've been involved in the Colorado Women's College strategic planning for the last year plus with us. And we did a lot of really cool thinking in that. We did it with disruptive thinking, disruption dinners, design thinking sessions. And I remember having a phone call with you where I called and I said, Pam, we got the results from this survey that we did, where we surveyed about 400 people and we asked them, where does inequity show up most in your life? And there was this pause and I said, Pam, they said home. And we both kind of just went, wow. So I just kind of want to just take us back to that moment and have you reflect on it a little bit.
It made a lot of sense when we thought about it, and it was, of course, and for me, I always like to find out why I didn't think about that, like why was that so surprising? And it really came down to, you know, when we talk about organizations and corporations, and you and I have been involved with women's organizations, you know, for over 20 years, we were never allowed to talk about the home. It was, that was kind of off limits, you know, and it was, well, we can't touch that. And so we really realized that we were confining ourselves to what happened when you walk through the door of the office, and all the barriers must be there. And while certainly there are a lot of systemic and cognitive biases and issues within the office, the one that kept coming up as soon as we opened our mind to it, as soon as we said, well, hold on, let's go find out. And one of the first things that I did was work with another organization after that meeting to say, how are people feeling about that? And what are the things holding them back? And and starting to research online, and there's a lot of books already out there about it. That, you know, when you look at this concept of the sticky floor, so it's not the glass ceiling that we're trying to jump up and hit our heads on. Sometimes it's a sticky floor that's holding us back. And what was that? And when that concept came up, as maybe there's things happening in the household, things happening within your life that were actually holding you down to the position you were in, I researched that, and there's books on sticky floor. There's concepts around this. So it wasn't a new idea or concept. It was just one that I think we have been preventing ourselves from exploring. And so once I started to really feel like, well, what if things were holding us to the job? And then the other reality is, a lot of times our jobs aren't awful. So we're getting paid well. We're in great jobs. We're finding nice balance. So it wasn't like we were in this awful job that, you know, we hated. A lot of times we loved it. And that was part of the sticky floor was, you know, you enjoyed your job, you were good at it. Your boss is telling you you're great. You're getting paid well. You have all these other commitments. So you're kind of like, well, this feels good. And so once I opened my mind that, yes, there are times where you're trying to elevate yourself and hitting some type of a wall or ceiling, but a lot of what's holding us back is sometimes positive things. Like, you know, again, it feels good to be told you're great at your job, so you want to stay in it a little bit longer, you know. And so that really opened my mind. And again, I challenge myself all the time to say, why didn't we think about that before? Why didn't we push on that concept that we couldn't talk about the home when we were talking about organizational diversity?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say, just having an office next door to you, you know, you had these like tips and tricks that you would always give. So one of them was that you and your partner, if you're in a relationship, that you can't both hold the FU card at the same time, right? You both have to, somebody has to keep some of the financial stability, right? And but thinking about it in that way was helpful. And then I remember walking into your office, well, knocking because the door was shut, which it usually wasn't. And you peeked around, you let me in, and sure enough, one of our colleagues was actually lying on the floor of your office doing her IVF treatments, doing her shots in her stomach. And you've always been able to create that safe space. So while we didn't name it, we were talking about it. And so we went on past this survey, and we had an event called Hack the Household. Pam was there, and we brought in some facilitators, and we did a full day of design thinking around what goes on in the house and how can we, and really the personal ecosystem, and how can we make some changes. We had a lot of ideas that day, but two things that I watch you do a lot in your career are evolve language and broaden your circle. And those were two things that came up that day. Could you talk with us about both of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talked about the household, you know, we found ourselves talking a bit about our own household, and and all of a sudden it was like, well, does it have to be the household? Like, do we have to put four walls around it? Because I was really convinced that, and Steve might be on the call, my husband, so he's probably listening and going, did you tell her about the FU card? But I think for us, you know, it wasn't a matter of shifting anything to someone else in the household necessarily. And that was what it was always felt like, this, you know, equity in the household was about shifting to another person, and that there was inequities. And I said, we need to really expand that thinking, because what if it is shifting it outside of the household, or shifting it to a neighbor, or to a relative, or to a friend? So we kind of have to blow the top off of this house that we have confined everything in, and start to think about, you know, what if it is not doing something anymore? What if that is the issue? What if it's finding you know, a relative who wants to share things that you're good at? And I remember there was a moment where I think I was reading an article or something, and there was a woman talking about, you know, really having to really fight and argue with her kids to say, you know, when you're cleaning the kitchen, you have to like pick the dish towel up, and you have to, and she's going through this list of things that really upset her that people didn't do. And she was really trying to get them to own doing that.
Right.
And it dawned on me at that moment, you know, this form of equity could be not doing it, like leave the dish towel on the floor. But it also was this concept of, getting people to realize that sometimes you are asking people to do something for you. So acknowledging that your house, the rest of the people in your household could be perfectly fine that that dish towel stays on the floor for a year. It is
Right.
not bothering them, and they're not expecting you to pick it up. And that was the mindset that this person was in, was they're leaving that dish towel for me to pick up because they're expecting me to clean up after them. And when you shift your mindset to go, they actually don't care. Like the dish towel can stay on the floor forever, and they're not going, I wonder when mom's going to pick that dish towel up. They don't even see it. So all of a sudden, if you rephrase it to say, I actually need you to pick that dish towel up for me, like it's going to make me feel better if you pick that dish towel for me. That shift, it's like, oh, okay, I am asking them to do something. And yes, I do want you to start to do these things.
Yeah.
So that's when I was really excited about the Hacking the Household. It was shifting our own mindsets as to what people are expecting of us, and stop judging ourselves, and also figuring out what we can and what we can just stop doing as a household, and the house actually still runs.
Yeah, that's true. And we talked a lot about language that day. I want to ask you about like equity and equality, right? These are these terms that are coming up, or just saying, hey, you guys, I have a colleague on my team who has, we've had lots of conversations about this, and I thought, you guys has just become a ubiquitous term. It's fine. It doesn't feel like a gender term to me. And after about 3 or 4 months of really thinking about it and watching how it's used, I'm in her camp. Like, it kind of does bug me a little bit, and I wonder what what assumptions come behind it. What are some of the pieces of language that you run into? I know you run into this a lot at work.
Yes, and I, of course, being from the South, I am really pushing for y'all to come back strong as a replacement for you guys. So if everybody can join me there, we sound better. But we've been doing y'all for a while, and it works fine. But the ones that I'm really focused on right now are things around violence and mental health. And when you realize how often someone says, if I have to sit through another one of these meetings, I'm just going to shoot myself in the head. And you see that and you go, oh my gosh, like, what are we saying, right? And I use that as a training method to say, sometimes your language, it isn't about being politically correct, because that's the first thing I get is, Pam, is there going to be a single word in the English language that we can use going forward if you take all of our words away, right? And so when you talk about it in the sense of actually not hurting someone, as opposed to being politically correct, because that's not what we're talking about, then all of a sudden people they take a deep breath and they're like, well, I don't want to hurt anyone. And so when you start talking about mental health and you say, I ask how many people in the room have been impacted by someone who has lost someone to suicide, it's, everybody's hands go up, right? And then I say, so now if that happened and somebody used that hand motion to describe, that they hate this meeting, how is that going to make you feel? And all of a sudden people will call me and say, do you know how many times I hear that phrase now? And I realize there's probably somebody in that room that we just created a really bad moment for them. And then it makes them realize that the words, it's not about being politically correct. It's about really hurting someone, making them feel really sad, or bringing back a memory, or excluding them. And the other one, and this is maybe an age thing, but do you remember the phrase, open the kimono?
Right, yeah.
You're literally talking about opening a person's dress, or clothing, right? And so when you hear that phrase and you're like, gosh, and younger people actually don't know that phrase. So if they're younger people, I've never heard that, but people my age at 50, plus they're going, oh, I remember that phrase. And you say, we could be so much more creative. Like we could say, peel the onion, open the blinds. But there's some people that actually will double down on that. And if I point out to them, hey, you probably want to not use that phrase. And so, well, why? It's very descriptive. I'm like, yeah, exactly. And can you imagine somebody on the other end feeling like you're opening their dress? So those are the kind of things that I'm interested in calling out. And I try to ask my clients first, how would you like me to point these out? Would you like me to just make a little list, and then at the end of the week go, hey, these are the things, or do you want me to raise my hand, or what do you want me to do? And most all of them will say, no, raise your hand right there in the moment. Right. And so I started kind of making a face, like if somebody says something, I'll just go, what? And I was like, well, I mean.
Maybe we all need to have that uh-oh face.
Have that face, because then it feels less formal, as opposed to me waiting and saying, Ann, 10 minutes ago we were talking, you said this, and all of a sudden you're having to remember what you said 10 minutes ago, and it feels like a formal issue. It can be informal. It can just be like, yikes, and so some people say oops or but something to let people just casually know, that we could have said it differently and being a little bit more creative in our language. So that's what I'm focused on. Anything around violence, guns, mental health. I think we're all a bit fatigued with the world out there. Let's try to use other language when we're not talking about guns and violence and sadness.
I've been heavily involved in mental health through the Depression Center at the University of Colorado. And one of the things that we talk about is the word commit around suicide, committing suicide the way you would commit a crime. And so really sort of saying somebody died by suicide or other ways. And it's amazing how it really does shift your belief around those things. So there is a power of language, and I think that's something we need to look at when we think about the household is, and as our work goes forward. And if you're here and you have things and ideas in the chat, please put some of those ideas into the chat, because we would love very much to have some words that we could kind of investigate or play with or just kind of work on. So Pam, actually there's a question on this language piece right now. I'm going to interject with it, which is, do you have examples of new language that you have seen drive equity forward in organizations where they pick up a new term or phrase and they do that? Maybe even in the titles of the people who run the groups. I don't know.
Yeah, we're seeing, as a global community, there is a desire to change the language around from diversity and inclusion to something else. And I don't know that anyone has felt that they've been really great at that without people feeling like they're dropping them. If you drop the word diversity, and you go to inclusion, does that mean that you feel like diversity has been achieved? And the answer would be no. And so, so there's a lot around there. I think where people are really focused right now is giving more storytelling and examples that help people understand what you're talking about. And so for example, the word inclusion, right? It's the new purpose and inclusion, or where we're seeing people, you see that a lot in titles. So inclusion is something that I think we all agree is a bit of the end hopeful result, right? Inclusion and belonging is what we're going for. And so we say things like, be more inclusive, right? And then people walk away and go, okay, well, what does that mean, right? And so I really have been focused on asking people about behaviors that drive inclusion. So we really realize you can't call yourself inclusive, and it's not that your inclusion is a feeling, it's not a behavior. And so when you start to think about, well, what is an inclusive behavior? I test it with my team. I said, do you think I'm inclusive? And they're like, oh yeah, you're inclusive. And so, great, well, what do I do that makes you feel included? And they're like, well, and they talk about their feelings. So I always feel like you care. I always feel like, I'm like, no, I'm asking what I did to make you feel that way. And then they're stuck. They're like, I have no idea. So it's why I have a quote up here, my Angela quote that says, people will forget what you do, they'll forget what you say, but they'll always remember how you make them feel. And so I would never challenge, Dr. Angela, but I would say that's part of the problem is we do forget what people say and we forget what they did. All we remember is the feeling, and that is not repeatable. And when we're really talking about how we tell people to be more inclusive like someone else, you have to tell them what they did to make you feel that way. And so I'm on a bit of a mission to have people finish their sentence and not just say, just be more inclusive, and give actual examples. So I really push my team to say, what do I actually do? And they said, well, when you get on calls with us and you ask us about our weekend or you ask us how we're doing, you actually do seem to care. And some might call that nosy, but it drives me. And you do, you are thoughtful. I do turn my camera on as much as I can, especially people from where English isn't their first language. It's tough to sometimes understand me, especially if I talk fast. So having my camera on, they can see what I'm saying, see my emotions. So those are the things that I try to do as actions to make people feel more included. And then I push people to describe and think about their actual behaviors. And I believe that we could come up with a clever tagline and come up with new wording. But if we could actually get people to start describing behaviors as opposed to, directional, goals, then I think we can all start to repeat those and really understand what we need to do to drive more.
Right. That's great. I think that focus on belief and behavior, they're so connected, right? I think that they, behavior drives belief, drives behavior. So you are always on a mission, but you're like, I'm on a mission right now. This is the first sentence in my next question. You are personally always on a mission.
Yeah,
to evolve. And so, and it is one of the things that I love about you and that we have fun, chatting about. As we came up with and defined our values at the Women's College, one of our values is that the status quo is not our jam, right? Which was kind of a fun thing to set as a North Star for us. So you get to work with all these groups around the globe. What are some examples of groups that have done something that has challenged the status quo where you've seen it have positive impact?
Yeah. Well, I think the organizations that are now really challenging the use and the purpose of benchmarks. We all need benchmarks. We need to understand where we are, but companies that are now starting to say, well, what is that next practice? And so considering benchmarks as a bit of a table stakes and saying, these are the things that we need to do, but give me that next, what is that next practice that I will be happy to go out and experiment with? And so really challenging yourself to be open to experiment and failures in this space is huge. And there's a couple of clients now that are thinking about it like they're the beginner's mindset, which is a mindset that's been around forever, and a lot of cultures that yoga is a form of that beginner's mindset as well, that says, let's start from where are we now? And if someone tells me that 82% of companies do this, then I'm actually going to challenge that. So instead of focusing on, well, if 82% of companies do that, that must be good. Challenge, well, if we haven't seen the progress we wanted in the last 20 years, if 82% of the companies are doing this, maybe that's the problem. Like maybe we need to stop doing that, or realizing that something about that needs to be changed. So the companies that are really taking this, challenging everything, unless, those are the ones that are really driving progress. And I would say transparency. I'm not saying that's disclosure, right? So disclosure would be, I'm going to tell everybody and be very open with the public about my issues. But transparency, I consider that different, right? Transparency is, I'm going to make sure all my managers understand the current situation. And that it's obviously has its risks, especially in the United States, with a very litigious environment. But positioning the risk of your managers not knowing what's happening, which would be no action because they don't know what to act on if they don't know. So elevating no action as a risk just as equal as if I share the data, will I also, without a doubt, open myself up to risk, but no action could be a bigger risk because we aren't getting that return on the inclusion, the efforts we're putting in if we're not transparent. So that's one where we're starting to see, again, some progress around transparency to the manager level. Again, separating that from disclosure, which would be more of a public sharing of data.
I think that's fascinating because it gives some real insight into what drives a status quo, right? In that case, you're talking about a risk assessment that drives a status quo. What you were talking about earlier with the sticky floor is sometimes what drives a status quo is comfort. And so you've got to really kind of know what the motivating pieces are if you want to get to that, which is fascinating.
You're an attorney, Ann. 15 years ago, right? Or maybe even less, you would advise your clients to mitigate risk, right? To limit your risk and your exposure. And so I know we're going to talk about judgment in a bit, but if we take the judgment hat off of why we did certain things, whether it was Me Too moments where we covered things up or whatever happened in the past, our mindset was mitigating risk, right? That was the approach that we took, that we were told to take. And so once we realized why we did all of those things in the past, it was to limit the risk to the firm. That was it. And you're just now starting to see companies that are saying, let's move away from shareholder value being the number one driver of anything we do to a more balanced stakeholder view, full stakeholder view of including purpose. And so that's been a shift in the direction of the organization to move towards a more purposeful approach, as opposed to shareholder value being the number one driver. So I think that, to me, again, I try not to judge why we did some stuff 20 years ago, and just really focus on, again, if we can start with the beginner's mindset of where are we today, what's the environment today, and look forward. Those are the companies that are really coming up with some pretty cool ideas.
Yeah. How do you make the case, this is a question from Maggie Red, how do you make the case to companies and organizations that equity at home is important to them as well as to their employees?
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. I think you can start with giving examples and, again, storytelling. And so I know our CEO, Bob Moritz, posted on Instagram yesterday about equity at home and really focusing on how important that is. And I think we're at this unexpected moment, right this moment, where we're all seeing a little bit more of how things are done in the household. And we're like, wow, okay, there's a lot to running a household. And we have a bit of appreciation for other people in the house and what they have to do to help pull their weight in the house. And so I think this is the right time for everyone to come out and say what's working for them, and again, no judgment if it's not what works for you. And having those business leaders acknowledge that and share that, that's going to be the way that we really have that kind of symbolic act that it really does matter. And so, and again, I look at this moment, and I'm 53 years old. In case you didn't know, I will not be having any more children. And so, when now the parental leaves are so much more amazing than they were when I was having my 4 kids, I can't actually demonstrate that behavior of taking leave anymore. I had that opportunity,
right.
15, and my oldest is 29. I don't have that opportunity to demonstrate that behavior. And many leaders are in that position where we can't actually demonstrate what next generations are coming up through with equity. But right now we can. And so this is, like, again, that unexpected moment where you can see leaders doing the dishes and making meals and being home with their kids and reading to them. And you didn't get to see that inside of their home like we did before. And so I'm really excited for the leaders, again, that are stepping up and really showing the struggles of trying to be a parent. We have a couple of leaders who are, again, being very, very transparent and open and authentic about the challenges, that everything is not, but beyond these doors that I've just closed and locked the dogs and the kids outside, right? There's sometimes chaos, and it's tough to manage. So, and an appreciation that we get to sometimes walk out of this house and go travel on a business trip and close our office door and get away from it, whereas sometimes our partners and spouses do not. And so that, to me, is where you can really show that you do believe that there's a lot of unpaid things happening within a household that you may or may not be sharing fully with others.
I think you and I need to write an article about demonstrating inclusive behavior or something. That is fascinating, because I think that we don't think of that as necessarily in that way as a leadership trait, right? But maybe being leaderly, like in my case, I've got some folks on my team who have kids, and opening my door and letting one of my kids pop in occasionally, just because they slip notes under the door. I might as well just let them pop in, because maybe that would be a little bit more, kind of signaling, hey, I know this is happening, it'd be okay. Can you think about what the Zoom culture is doing around inclusive behavior, and just kind of how you're dealing with that, and then also even just the fatigue piece of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely when you think about it, inclusive behavior, keeping the camera on is one of those ways. But with every good thing, there's always too much of it, right? And so, so for several years, we've been, keeping our cameras on, and but lately, because we don't get to leave as much, and it seems like it's conference call after conference call, the Zoom fatigue is real, and it appears to be more heavily being felt by women. And a colleague of mine, Thea Smith, and I were just sitting there the other day thinking of, why is this? Like, we work hard, so this is not different. Why do we feel so exhausted? And my back hurts. Like, I never had back issues, and now my back's hurting. And so we realized that it was that this posturing, like, I'm not sitting back and just, doing this like I would on a conference call. I'm like, got a little, angling going. But Thea came up with a word that this, kind of this unflinching gaze, that even if you have 25 people on a Zoom call and you're not speaking, you believe people are watching you. And so you're in a, you're kind of smiling, showing good face. You're not, sitting there and you're not eating. And if you were in a big conference room with 25 people and somebody at the end was talking, you would assume everybody's looking at that person, and you would relax your features. You might even lean back.
Right.
You might kind of sit there, or you're kind of taking notes or something. You're not assuming people are watching you, but there's something about all those boxes sitting there and assuming everyone is looking at you. And so that unflinching gaze is really hard and to feel. So we're starting to incorporate turning cameras off at certain points and saying, picking calls that say, hey, let's turn our cameras off and let's walk instead, or keeping the camera on if it's somebody you're meeting for the first time. But also on I do a lot of virtual focus groups and virtual alignment sessions, and we're starting to tell people, okay, this is going to be a moment where we're going to be presenting things. So let's everybody else turn your cameras off, just to give yourself a bit of a break. Give your eyes a break, give your body a break, lean back, don't worry about who's looking at you. So we're incorporating that in intentionally to say, let's go ahead and take a breath to shut your camera off. And people are really appreciating it and realizing that, again, it has, like everything, it's got so much benefit, but it also can also contribute to the fatigue that we're feeling right now.
Do you think that having real life happening in the background occasionally, even if it's spontaneous, if you're watching a woman identified person or a male identified person, is your reaction different to that, or are people's reactions different?
Yeah, I think it's starting to get a little bit more normal for all. So I see that, but I do think initially seeing a leader, whether it's man or woman, but seeing leaders in that more casual role has been a lot more surprising to people than seeing others where maybe their life was more integrated already. And so that's been a surprising element, and it has tended to be men, since 80% of our leaders are men right now in the U.S. But I think that's starting to be less of a, oh my gosh, they're so amazing, look, they're saying hello to their child. I mean, that's not as amazing as it was before. We are seeing a lot more kids and dogs and people, again, letting their house in. I do think we're starting to realize that there is still some, administrative things like trying to mute your phone more often. And so we're starting to see people get more, you're just focused on if there is a lot of background noise. Initially, we kind of all embraced it as chaotic and fun, and we're going to get through this together. And it was this feeling of community that everybody's got all this stuff going on in the background. But now we're starting to see if this is the normal, which it will be, just muting your phone, thinking about it again. If you're stepping away, turn your camera off and say, be right back, but keeping your phone on mute more, so that those background noises aren't disruptive to a normal setting. So.
We have a question. If you don't have a culture of cameras off or of being transparent, how do you recommend approaching your leadership, your manager, your boss regarding developing a more equitable approach to self-care?
And so was the question, if your cameras are always on, or
Right.
not.
If your culture isn't, if you don't work for Pam Jeffords, and you've got, you've got these less transparent, sort of more rigid cultures where there are expectations that you'll be on and focused. How do you talk to a boss or a manager about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would always start with the top. If you've got a great CEO that really is saying right now, I want to hear from you, which again, this unexpected moment right now of where everyone wants to hear from their colleagues, start there and just say, I just have an idea. What do you think? And sharing it with them.
And what if you don't? What if you don't have somebody who's saying, I want to hear from you? How do you?
Oh, I don't think I'm supposed to be able to say, look for a purpose-driven company. But I do think those are the leaders that you want to follow, are those that are. I mean, there are a lot of leaders out here now that are stating their purpose so clearly that you could choose to go work for them or not. And so I would say to people, as purpose-driven organizations become more clear on their purpose, really believe them. And some purposes are becoming so clear that you would look at that and say, well, I actually don't want to work there. And that's okay too, because there are a lot of people, again, when we take our judgment hat off, there are a lot of people who actually don't really want transparency and authentic behaviors. They just want to come to work, do their job, and then go home. And
Right.
so those people, that mindset would be great for them. They'd probably seek out that company and say, I really do want to work for a company where they don't want to know who I am. They don't want to know anything about me. They don't care about my gender, my sexual orientation. I do not bring my whole self to work. I bring my work self to work, and then I go home, and then I myself, and I don't really want you to bring your whole self to work. And there are companies
Right.
out there, and really there are people that value that. And so the hope is, as companies become more purpose-driven and more clear about their employee value proposition, that people will start to migrate to companies based on the employee value proposition they're offering. And it isn't how I would have thought this would have happened. I thought purpose were to get me just to come there, but purpose could actually make me avoid that company. And if it's that clear. So I would really say, first, try asking. I am seeing a lot of leaders that in the past wanted to be more inclusive. They wanted to be more open, but
Right.
it's really hard to again, speaking from a 53-year-old myself, it's hard to just show up different tomorrow. And people aren't going to believe you, even if you're really truly trying to show up different tomorrow. But this moment has given everyone the opportunity to show up different and give them a chance that this could have been the moment that they're going to become more open and empathetic.
I read a terrific book recently that was given to me by Kate Willink here at the university, called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. And one of the things that it said in there is it's about developing community and a sense of belonging. And she said, sometimes the most important thing you do in creating community is to close the door. It's about how you invite certain people, but then you also do close the door, because if it's open to everyone, it's effectively kind of open to no one. And it was for somebody who really I really do just want to be inclusive. And it just has had me thinking about how do I create meaning for those people who've chosen to be included, which is good. All right, Pam, tell us what you're reading and what you're absorbing and what your resources are. We have about 3 minutes left. And
I am still a bit of a short burst reader because I am pretty busy. So I am following a ton of people on Instagram. I think I mentioned to you the other day, I'm following the woman who's her Instagram is called Black Coffee with My White Friends, and really trying to understand and really understand my privilege and especially my unearned privilege, and really I love reading all of those and on Twitter. I am Twitter and Instagram, but I am reading the book Fair Play. I think I mentioned to you it's really again about that beginner's mindset of how do we actually start at home and reset and recalibrate everything that we were defaulting to in the past, and focusing instead on things that we're good at and things that we like. And then if we can combine those two, and then everything else, that's where we have to figure out what of that we're going to outsource. So I'm reading that book and rereading some old ones. I love first break all the rules. So I've got 4 books right there right now sitting there that I want to reread. But I am more of a short burst of following people on Instagram that can really open my mind up so that I can really appreciate all the perspectives out there. And there's so many, and I find new ones all the time. So I love recommendations on any Instagram or Twitter to follow.
Yeah, and your handle on Twitter, it's just at Pam Jeffords, right?
At Pam Jeffords. I was one of the early ones. I think I don't know what Twitter uses, but I actually have no hyphens. It's just at Pam Jeffords.
That's great. All right, well, we have come to the end of our very fast time here, and what we always want to do is have it be digestible for the people who join us, and then also recognize you have things to do. So we want to give you the last 20 minutes in the hour to go do them, so that you can show up and be your best and truest selves, and find a little balance in this crazy world between between home and work. I do want to mention we have One Day for DU that is coming up, and so look for that to come up on our Facebook and our social media. It will be on May 20th, so it's an opportunity to show your support for CWC and for DU, and just kind of come together as a community in that sense. So, but Pam, you're just the best. So I want to say thank you, and thanks for your wisdom.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always fun.
Yeah. All right. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
See everyone.